Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Parenting Hour. You're tuned into Unity FM 93.5 here in the West Midlands and 105.1 if you're tuned into us on Inspire FM. Welcome to this evening's show where, of course, we're going to give you a lot of information, a lot of information in relation to unions and in relation to apprenticeships, which is the right time because our young people who may be going into apprenticeships have just finished off lots of courses and would be looking at what opportunities are there for them. So I'm hoping this evening you will be able to take away information that you can share with your families, share with your relatives, discuss about it, and ring in if you want to find out more information from us. And the number is 0121 772 8892. We really do want to hear your voice. We really love to hear you interact with us and leave those messages. If not, with the studio manager, if you're not able to ring in live, leave the messages and we will get back to you live this evening on the show. And I have with me somebody who can really answer all your questions and knows all about this because I certainly don't. Welcome, Matt. How are you this evening?
I'm very fine, Kathleen. I'm very fine. Thank you very much for having me.
It's
I'm not
so good.
I'm not sure I can answer all the questions, but what I do promise you is that I will take all the questions, and if I can't answer them tonight, I'll get back to you for later.
Amazing. And that's all we need indeed. We know it's difficult to be able to answer everybody's question, but we hope that we can help people and support people as best we can. And whatever they need, we try our best indeed. Between yourself and myself and the studio managers, we'll try our best to help and support them. So, Matt, please introduce yourself to our audience first and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, my name's Matt Poynton, and I am 48 years old. And I guess the first thing to say on anything about approachable parenting is I am a dad. So I feel your pain, but I also feel your joy sometimes. And my own son he's actually 18 at the moment. So this is something that's very relevant to my own life as well. But I'm here obviously in a professional capacity today, and I'm a projects officer at an organisation called the TUC. So the TUC is the Trades Union Congress, and we've been going since 1868. And what the TUC is it's kind of like the umbrella body for all the trade unions, or at least most of the trade unions in England and Wales. And so we have all told about 50 trade unions and about 6 million members are represented. And for listeners who might not be familiar with what a trade union is an organization protected by law in which working people can join, and it helps it protects you at work. We fight for better pay, better conditions. So I guess on a very minimum level, a trade union is like an insurance policy against, bullying, harassment, unfair disciplinaries. But on a maximum level, it can be so much more because we are as well a movement. And so you can actually volunteer. You can become a trade union rep. And indeed, that's how I got involved many, many years ago. And you can get involved. We support a lot of causes that are quite close to people's hearts. So, we get involved in a lot of stuff like international solidarity stuff, but also local things. And we tend to get in the news quite regularly just lately. Because a lot of people will associate trade unions with strikes. But actually, and strikes are where, for people who don't quite understand what a strike is, it's where people decide that they will withhold their labor. So they're in a job with a contract, but maybe the employer is not doing their end of the contract, or negotiations are broken down. And so they stop working. And so people think trade unions are all about strikes, but actually strikes is a very, very tiny bit of what we do, and it's a last resort. Like, you really only go on strike when everything else has failed. But, sadly, it has had to happen in recent years. And, there are strikes going on at the moment. One was about the bin workers, for
Mhm.
example, in
Yeah.
Birmingham, where the councils tried to cut £8,000 off their pay per annum, which is a lot if you're a bin worker.
Mm.
But we do try and resolve the strikes as quickly as possible because we want to get people back to work, and ultimately we're there about making people's lives better, not worse, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know, does that answer the question, or is there anything that you think listeners would want to know more?
Well, you're mentioning there about the bin strike, which is for our listeners here in Birmingham and the West Midlands. It's something that they know well of, and maybe also they might know of the student doctors being on strike, and that's
Mhm.
gone on for a period of time as well, looking for fairer wages for the work that they do. So it is there to support people, to help people, because it mightn't always be a strike, as you're saying. It may be some issues in the
Mhm.
workplace. Maybe you could give us some examples of
Yeah.
other issues that people might have that don't know where to go to, and
Mhm.
where you would come in
Yeah.
and help support them.
Well, as I said, I began as a trade union rep, which is a voluntary position. Trade union reps don't get paid, but
Mm.
we get elected by our members. And everybody, by the way, in the UK has the right to join the trade union. Whether there is a recognised trade union in their workplace or not, you still have the right. An employer cannot refuse you being in a trade union. And I began. I grew up in England, and then I later went and lived abroad. I lived in various countries, and then came back to the UK. And I actually ended up working in a prison as a teacher.
Mhm.
And so became the rep for the teachers in a prison. Firstly with a union called the University and Colleges Union, and then later with another union called Community. And actually, I never went on strike. Do you know what? I don't think I've ever been on strike. But what we did do was lots of personal cases. So it could be that a an employer felt they were being bullied.
Mm.
Or it could be that, they had a disciplinary and they wanted somebody in there just to make sure that procedure has been followed. And so most of what I was doing was stuff like that. And actually, it can be quite stressful at times because, you're going in a meeting where somebody can lose their job and they've got a mortgage to pay, they've got a family to look after, and
Mhm.
that's very stressful for that person. And if you're in that position, then you're not thinking straight.
Mhm.
And I'll be honest with you, talking to myself, I've had all the training because trade union reps are trained. Um, but when it's actually you that it happens
Yeah.
to, your
Yeah.
brain just goes and you're
Yeah.
just all over the show. And
Mhm.
you need that kind of level head with you. And you
Mhm.
also need that second person because otherwise you can go into a meeting and the management and HR can claim that they've said X, Y, and Z, and you've got no proof that they've said that or not. But
Mhm.
if you've
Mhm.
got that second person there, it
Mhm.
just makes sure that procedure's followed. And of course, because I do want to talk primarily about apprenticeships, but also
Mhm.
more widely about our rights at work. Anybody, whether you're a member of a trade union or not, has the right, if you are in a disciplinary situation, to take somebody in with you.
Mhm.
Okay, but the law is clear. It's either a trade union rep or a friend and colleague, so somebody who works there. And so, you're not in a union, you can take your colleague in, but the problem is they're not trained
Mhm.
in what to look for. They may be very well intentioned and you might be very close friends, but they're not trained, they don't know the law.
Mhm.
Also, they might be scared for any repercussions to them if they're
Mhm.
working in the same place. So I mean, that's why I would always say it's safe to have a trade union rep with you. So that's the kind of stuff we do. We also, we campaign for good stuff. So, like, my job is focused around learning. And it's actually my project, which is called the West Midlands Workers' Centre. And it's actually funded by the Metro Mayor of the West Midlands, Richard Parker. And that's because the Combined Authority now has the education budget for adults, not for children, for
Mhm.
adults. And so they see a value in working with trade unions because they want people at work to keep learning. And
Mhm.
I'll be honest with you, Kathleen, this is something I'm really passionate about. Learning is not just when you're at school and then if you go to college or university, it's lifelong
Yeah.
and it goes into retirement.
Hmm.
You know, and so I really passionately believe that we should always be learning and learning and learning because, it can help us get a promotion, it could help us get a new job, but it can actually just enrich our lives. I mean, with the support of my trade union, I did my master's and I did it in creative writing. I don't work in creative writing, but I just love writing and
Sure.
I love that creativity and it really helps me express myself. And I would also say there's a massive health benefit to keeping learning. And that could be for boosting confidence. It could be particularly with elderly people combating isolation. It can slow down dementia. So there's a whole heap of reasons why we should learn,
Mhm.
as well as, in addition to just getting a job. Um, but it's very hard to get the message out to workplaces. And so the combined authority, and I will say both Richard Parker and Andy Street before,
Mhm.
they said we want to work with the TUC, we want to work with the trade unions. And I primarily go into workplaces around the West Midlands,
Mhm.
encouraging people to. And so that's something we do. And I also go into community groups, which is, of course, where we met, working with some wonderful women in the Somali community.
Mhm. Which is amazing. And we'll come on to apprenticeships in a bit, but I just wanted to follow up from this actually when
Hmm.
we met at a wonderful event in the Somali community, which was great that Sati House had put on, and it was Soho House had put on for, and it was a great that it brought so many people together. What I was just thinking there when you were talking, if there is issues in the workplace and somebody didn't have the language skills, is there enough
Mm.
people volunteering that have those language skills that can be like you, trained up, that have the knowledge and skills as a rep, but also has the language skills to be able to explain that to that individual, either there and then during the meeting or later on what went on and what happened?
Well, the short answer is yes. But basically, I think it's bigger than language skills. And I remember when I was training to be a trade union rep, they gave an example of someone from the Bakers Union. And the rep from the Bakers Union went up to the management and said, I want to know about the temperatures of the ovens because, to check that it's all the safety precautions are legal. And the manager turned around to them and they said, well, why would we give you that information? You wouldn't understand it. And he goes, no, I wouldn't, but I know a man who will. And that's the whole point with unions is that we believe that we are stronger working together. And so what we do is we have support from the regional offices of our unions, and so if we do have a worker who, for example, we met at a Somali event, speaks Somali and isn't confident in their English.
Mm.
Then what we would do is we would say, right, well, okay, we insist that any meeting is with Somali translation, and if we can, we would put a rep there who is from a Somali background so they could do it directly. And I guess that's important is that I said reps are a voluntary position, and we want as many people from black and minority ethnic backgrounds becoming reps because then they can support those communities more effectively. But, I'm reminded of recently I went into a workplace with the Communication Workers Union,
Mm.
CWU, and that's a Royal Mail super hub out near Rugby. And the three learning reps there, and there are a lot more reps than the three, but the three that are just dedicated to supporting people learning, all of them spoke minority languages. So there was a Sikh guy who spoke Punjabi, and there was two Pakistani guys that spoke Urdu and Kashmiri. So, they're actually getting support off their peers. And on top of that, it's empowering those reps because maybe they've never been in an advocacy position before. And so it's giving them skills. So for me, it's a bit of a win-win situation there.
Mm.
But I mean, I told you I worked abroad for years, and one of the places I worked at was in Bulgaria. And so the Bakers Union actually got in touch with me. They said, we got a factory full of people out in Colville, and they're all Bulgarians. We can't talk to them. And they're all agency workers. So I said, right, I'll come down. And I literally sat chatting with these Bulgarians in Bulgaria. And it was great for me to be able to practice the language.
Yeah. Amazing, amazing. And language skills are amazing. It's wonderful to
Mm.
have language skills indeed. And I think before we talk about apprentices, we just want to give that message, which we will give again at the end of the show, the importance of knowing your trade union and where to go. And maybe you will have some links or something that you can share with us before the
Mm.
end of the show so people can
Yeah.
find out that information. If you do want to ring in, we are live this evening here on Unity FM 93.5 and on Inspire FM 101.5 this evening on the radio. So please do ring into us, and we're here willing and able to take your calls and have a discussion and try and answer your questions if you have a question, inshallah, please do ring in. Now, you also, Matt, work and do a lot of work around apprentices. Tell us a little bit about that and what do you do?
Well, I'll be honest, Kathleen. I before I worked on this Midlands project, I worked on a national service, which is no longer continued because the Department for Education cut the funding, and it was called Union Learn, and it was a national project supporting learning all across the country, and I was actually my special focus was on apprenticeships. So a lot of my knowledge comes from then when I did that, and what I've done is I've helped support uh, employers and trade unions support apprentices over many years, and I've even actually been involved in writing an apprenticeship at one time, which was a bit of an interesting experience. And if we have time, I can talk about it. But I guess rather than going into that straight away, shall I talk a little bit about what is an apprenticeship and what isn't an apprenticeship? Because I think a lot of people aren't quite clear.
Hmm. I agree. A lot are people are unclear what it is and who does it really affect and what does it mean being an apprentice? Because
Mhm.
especially with some young people getting voluntary work experience and apprenticeship and the difference with that and what is the difference
Mhm.
there?
Okay. Well, firstly, apprenticeships have been around for a very long time. I mean, literally for as long as humans have been laboring, I think there have
Yeah.
been apprentices, and it was often the father would teach the son or something like that. In societies back to the Bronze Age and so on. But I mean, I told you that the TUC began in 1868, and actually, in our very first meeting in the Mechanics Hall in Manchester, apprentices were on the agenda then, and they're still on the agenda. But
Mm.
what we call apprentices now is actually far more specific, and it's defined in law. And I'm going to go into that in a bit more detail later, but essentially, the traditional thing is that, if you want to learn a trade, like an electrician or a plumber, then you would leave school. You wouldn't go down the academic route because, that's not really for that.
Mm.
And you would be apprenticed to a plumber or an electrician.
Mm.
And you would go and then you would learn the trade for several years, and then you would be able to become a plumber and electrician yourself. And that's the traditional understanding of apprentices, right?
Mhm.
And so, first of all, there's several stereotypes in that. One of them being that apprentices are young. It's like the 17-year-old kid fresh out of school. That's the stereotype. And secondly, that it is those practical trades. So it's not academic subjects. It's not it's just it's what you would think of like plumbing, electrician, bricklaying,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. But these stereotypes are inaccurate, and that's very important to say. Um, and then what happened in like the 80s and the 90s, you got a lot of private training providers who came onto the market and they started marketing these apprenticeships, but they weren't really apprenticeships. They were a bit of a con. and they would be like, oh, you can become an apprentice plumber in 3 months. And it wasn't regulated. And so the whole term sort of lost a lot of respect because they were basically charging a fortune for you to do a short course that didn't really mean much because nothing was regulated. And so what happened, the government, and it was the Conservatives at the time, stepped in and they said, no, this is not acceptable. It's basically destroying the sort of practical sector, and it's destroying all confidence in training providers. And so they changed it, whereas apprentices are very strictly defined in law. So this is the first thing, is if somebody says they're going on an apprenticeship, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's not in the government list, it's not an apprenticeship, and you can't call it that. So, if I'm like, well, my uncle owns a garage, and so I'm going to become the apprentice to my uncle in the garage, and he's basically, having me there and pay me a bit of money every week, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's not an apprenticeship,
Yeah.
and it's not legal to call it so, right? And and that matters because there are legalities
Mm-hmm.
in all of this, right? So, what I'm going to do, obviously, we're on the radio, so our listeners can't see things, but I'm going to say something. There's a website called www.gov.uk slash apply hyphen apprenticeship.
Mm.
www.gov.uk slash apply hyphen apprenticeship. And that is, if you go on that page, it says find an apprenticeship. And it says at the bottom, find apprenticeships online, and there's a big search button, which you press, and it says 5,878 apprenticeships listed. Now, basically, those are the ones who are what are called official apprenticeship standards. And if it's not an official apprenticeship standard, which has been recognized by the Institute of Apprenticeships, the government, then basically it's not an apprenticeship. So working at your uncle's garage is not an apprenticeship. Now, you can work at your uncle's garage, but
Mm-hmm.
you can't call it an apprenticeship, and he can't pay you apprenticeship rates. And that's a very important legal point. What I thought I might do, Kathleen, is I might ask you, we could role play a bit here. What kind of apprenticeship might you be interested in?
So, if I was to do an apprentice, I would think, as myself, for an individual,
Mm,
I'd love to do something around plumbing or electricity to have just that
okay,
electrician, some of those skills that I need at home, just especially plumbing.
okay.
Sometimes it is really it needs something small to fix the problem, and you're bringing in a plumber, and I thought if I'd only known that. So if I had my life back again, I'd love to do something around that.
Right. So what I'm doing, there's one thing it says, because you can search this database of apprenticeships, and I think this is a really good place to start if
Mm,
you're interested in doing an apprenticeship, or if your kid is, right?
mm,
And or your young person, probably better to say. And so I go and search what is your interest, and we've got business, finance, public services. Well, that's not plumbing. Creative and service industries, no. Environment and agriculture, no.
mm,
People and care, no. Technical and engineering, that sounds better.
mm,
So, construction and building, digital or engineering and manufacture. So it's breaking it down further. So I'm going to go on the construction one. That sounds promising. Search all across England, or you can search for the postcode, and then it gives me the kind of ones that we can do, and there's 294 results there. So there's loads there. So you can have a search through this database, and it shows you all these different ones. And yeah, it really is quite a useful tool. And so that's that. But every apprentice that's a standard, because remember I said they're called apprenticeship standards, right?
mm,
Um, they um, they all have they were all agreed, and what they do. and is they get a group of people from the industry together. So the plumbing apprenticeship standards, they would have various plumbing firms, some big, small, and little ones, and maybe, expert bodies and providers, and they would have got together and they would have said, right, well, what skills and what knowledge and what behavior do you need to be a plumber? And they would have battled it out over several months until they decide, right, okay, those are what we need. And then they would say, well, how long should this be? And then
Mhm.
they should be at what level?
Mhm.
So,
There's so much just information there, and we're coming into a commercial break soon. And we also have a question that somebody has phoned in and asked us about, which we'll come back to that straight after the
okay,
commercial break. Indeed, because the time goes by on us so quickly here, and we don't want to miss out on some questions. But it's amazing. I'm sorry I had to cut you off there.
no
Um, uh,
problem.
and you were just telling us about apprenticeship. But if listeners, if you can bear with us, especially that listener who phoned in, we will come back and answer your question straight after this commercial break, inshallah. And as you can see, Matt is full of information. Indeed. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Parenting Hour. You're tuned into Unity FM 93.5 here in the West Midlands and 105.1 if you're tuned into us on Inspire FM. We've got an amazing guest with us this evening, Matthew Poynton, who is talking to us about a wide range of topics. We started talking about trade unionism and all about trade unions. So he was giving us his expert advice and information around that. And then we moved on to apprenticeships. And I have to cut him off a little bit because, Matt, we've had a call that came in and we do want to answer this call. So it is around trade unions. And the caller said, what steps are taken to maintain equality and minority representations in trade unions? So I wonder if you could answer that for us, please.
No problem. So obviously, every trade union is different. It has its own structures, but the entire movement is very, very, very committed to equalities, and we're very much like when there are certain councils at the moment, there are attacking equalities, and we fight that, and that's one of our values. The trade unions has always been that every human being, every worker has an equal value, regardless of creed, color of skin, whatever. Um, but we also recognize that, there can be barriers, and particularly communities that have been here longer are better networked often, they're more established in the workplaces. And so the TUC has an equalities network and black activist network with special black activist training for black and minority ethnic reps. When I say black, we actually define black as anybody who's been affected by colonialism. So of an Irish background, you would count as black in that way. But yeah, so that's how we do it. We put a lot of resources into that. We have conferences on it, but also our individual unions have structures. Now, they are slightly different in every union, but basically they mirror what we do. So, have a look at what your union's doing, but they all do it. And, if a trade union was involved in discriminatory practices, they would either be, the TUC wouldn't accept them in the TUC, and because it's against the values of our movement. Our movement was set up to empower working people, like I say, 200 years ago. But have a look. I mean, the big unions, Unite, GMB, Unison, and then the teaching unions, National Education Union, NASWAT. Then you've got ones like RMT in railways, CWU in postal workers. Those kind of unions, PCS and the civil service, have a look at what they're doing, but they're very active on these issues. And so I guess, does that answer the question?
I suppose, and I wonder, do we need to be doing more to incorporate because of our ethnic minority communities now, especially in Birmingham, are becoming global majority communities? And I was just thinking when you were talking there, how would people know if their organization had a union or not? Would they be told when they take on employment, or is it up to them to find out?
Well, ultimately, it is up to you to find out because sadly, about 75% of workplaces in the UK do not have a recognised union. Now, it doesn't mean you can't join,
Hmm.
but a recognised union is where 50% of the workforce are in a union, and therefore the company has to recognise it. And when you're recognised, you can fight for the pay, you can negotiate wages. Or where the company has got a recognition agreement with a specific union. And in some, you know what, if you go and work in the railways, the union rep will approach you within an hour or two of you arriving, because, railway workers are almost 100% unionized. Similarly, teachers, very heavily unionized, civil servants, in the NHS, so the public sector in particular. But when and big manufacturing like Jaguar Land Rover, for example, BMW, but smaller workplaces, looking at hospitality, looking at some sort of call centers, those kind of places tend not to be unionized, and then it's more you've got to go and do the legwork. The unions will support as much as they can because we want to be we're organized everywhere, but realistically, that's the world we live in.
Mm.
And so, what I would say is if you're working in a workplace that is like not unionized, Unite and the GMB and Community are our big general unions, and they sort of represent everybody from taxi drivers to ambulance drivers to prison officers to, hotel workers and whatever. Whereas some of them, like the RMT, is, rail, maritime and transport. So they're people working on ships, people working on railways and taxi drivers, basically.
Mm. So I'm hoping, listener, that that answers your question. And I suppose the message that we'd like to give out this evening, and Matt can correct me, is to find out if you have a union or not, to go forward yourself and maybe be a union rep, especially if you're from an ethnic minority community and have those language skills, and to keep learning, like what we are
Yeah.
doing every day, and learning and finding out and supporting people, and seeing what we can do to help and support others. So it might be that it's not for you yourself or you're happy with everything, but it could be that others may need that help and support, and
Mhm.
you'd be there and able to help and support them.
So, shall we go back to the apprenticeships?
Please, yes, let's
Okay.
go back to the apprenticeship because I had said that I wanted to become and find out about being plumbing,
Mm.
and I don't think you had found it yet. You'd gone into a
Okay.
different category, but yeah, you were going to tell me of where I could go in Birmingham to take an apprenticeship if I was able to do that.
Well, what you do, every every apprenticeship, and plumbing, there's loads of apprenticeships for plumbing. So I would just say actually just go to your local colleges and see what's on offer.
Mm,
But apprenticeships are different under law than a normal job. And this is very important. So a normal a normal job, we all have a contract, or we should. If you haven't got a contract, there's a problem. But we should have a contract,
yeah.
right? And the contract is what we would call like linear, because there is at one end of the line, there is you, the employee, and at the other end of the line, there is the employer,
Mhm.
right? And so, the employer says, Kathleen, I want you to turn up on time. I want you to do your radio show. I want you to keep it clean. I want you to be professional. I want you to fit in with the ethos of the organization. And that's what you need to do. And if you don't do that, you're in breach of your contract and you could have problems. But then they need to pay you on time. They need to pay you the agreed rate. They need to give you working conditions that are safe. They need to, work in hours that are within the law, all those kind of things. And if they don't follow their end, then there's a problem, right?
So I just want to just say, when you're explaining about the radio, that this is a voluntary radio show, that all of us as hosts are volunteering to help our communities. MashaAllah, Unity FM do a great job in organising everything and putting it on, but always the hosts are volunteers and try to volunteer and giving back. So we don't probably
Okay.
fit quite into that scenario, but
Although what I will say, and this is an important point, voluntary jobs are covered under the law as well. You are still entitled to decent working conditions, and you're still entitled not to be bullied, and all of those things. So, but yes, you're right. If you're in a voluntary position, you don't have the contract, but you still have rights. But yes. So that's how a normal contract works. An apprenticeship contract is what we call a triangulated contract, because there is you, there is the employer, and there is the apprenticeship provider. Normally, a college doesn't have to be. So, for example, Toyota up near Derby, there's a part of Toyota that does the training because they have their own, they're such a big organization that they do that. Some it could be a private training provider, but the contract is triangulated. That means three organizations or individuals have signed it, right? So what there is there's certain rights and responsibilities that are not in a normal contract. So imagining, right, that you were paid, because it's just an example, okay, and you signed this contract, and you've turned up to do your job, right, and you're expecting to host a radio show. That's what you're employed to do. But the employer says, well, you know what, I've got somebody else today, you can make the tea all day. They can do that because at the end of the day, there's always a thing saying any reasonable duty. And making tea is a reasonable enough duty. So, it's not putting you in danger or anything like that. Whereas with apprenticeships, it's different because it's not any reasonable duty. Every apprenticeship has a list of what's called knowledges, skills, and behaviours. And these are the things that you have to do to complete the apprenticeship and that you will be tested on at the end. Right? Now, you could be tested in a variety of ways. It could be an exam. It could be you have to write an essay. It could be people just watch you doing it. So if it were a radio presenter one, you would have somebody, watching the program, for example. That would be a good way of testing that, better than an exam. But it doesn't matter how it's tested. You have to demonstrate these knowledge, skills, and behaviours. And if on the radio presenting apprenticeship standard, making tea is not one of those knowledge, skills, and behaviours, then they can't expect you to do it. Because you're there not just to work, you're there to learn. And so because let's be honest, if you were doing an apprenticeship and radio presenting, and then I said, right, Kathleen, well, I've got somebody else doing it today, just sit and make tea all week, then you're not learning anything.
Yeah.
I'm failing you. And at the end of the day, it's you that would fail. But the other thing is, because apprentices have different rates of pay, they are lower, right? Now, it could be, and the TUC, we would argue that apprentices should be paid the full rate. So, and very like organizations like Toyota pay their apprentices full rates. They don't pay them apprenticeship rate. But under law, you can pay less than the minimum wage. You can pay the apprenticeship rate, right? Because the idea is that you're getting this person a bit cheaper because they're not fully trained yet. And so, that's the sort of sop to the employer. And then the employer's getting somebody who they can develop in time to be a good employee. And the thing is, they're getting you cheaper. So they've got to put in to help make sure that you pass your apprenticeship, right? So you have to be doing your knowledge, skills, and behaviour. And if you're young person, for example, doing a plumbing one, and they find they just sat there, making tea all day, or just sat there twiddling the thumbs on the phone, then actually they've got a case that they're being sold short. So that's the first thing, and that's different than a normal job where actually I could put you making tea all day because it's a reasonable duty.
Yeah.
So there's that, but there's also the fact that protected by law in every apprenticeship, 20% of the time is off the job, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that means if you're doing your radio presenter one, that means 1 day a week, or maybe 1 week a month, or something. It can be organized in a variety of ways.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot be at work. That is your studying time
Mm-hmm.
because you are learning as well as earning. And so the fact is, if they turn around and they go, well, we'd like to give you 20% off, but we can't, straight away, you've got a case that you will win because they are setting you up to fail. And it's you, whereas with a normal worker, they may agree, well, we'll give our employees like 5 hours off a week to study, but if the circumstances are such that they can't free you, then I'm sorry, it's cancelled this week and they can do that. But you can't do it if it's an apprenticeship. It's protected by law. And that doesn't matter if it's a level 2 hairdressing apprenticeship or a level 7 nuclear physics apprenticeship.
Mm-hmm. 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 Great. So there's a lot of rights there that our apprentices need to know of and
Mm.
make sure that they get that experience and get that knowledge. It's a wonderful system. And like there's advantages and disadvantages to the system. Is there other advantages, maybe if we look at the apprentice in the first place to him, and then look at the advantages to the company?
Well, what I would say is, you know, we have to stay in education till we're 18 these days, right? And then, after that, what do we do? So the thing is, the two traditional routes are: do you go to university or do you do an apprenticeship?
Yeah.
Essentially, right?
Mhm.
And the big downside to university is it costs a lot of money,
Mhm.
right? And that I went to university, so but I think, did I get it free? Or yeah, I think I might have been the last year that got it free. And by the way, as a trade union movement, we think, university education should be free. It used to be, we could afford it then, we can afford it now. But we also live in the real world, and the real world says, no, you're paying, and it's not cheap, right? Apprenticeships, the big draw card about apprenticeships is it doesn't cost you anything, and instead you're earning.
Mm.
So that is the big advantage, and particularly if you are from a background where you're not super wealthy, then that can be a big draw card towards apprenticeships. Now, because you could say, well, that's okay if you want to do hairdressing because you don't really do that as a degree anyway. But like, I don't want to do hairdressing. I want to be a nuclear physicist. So I need to go to university,
Mhm.
right? Whereas what we have now are these things called degree apprenticeships. And basically, a degree apprenticeship, you go to university for free because you're earning at the same time. Now, it takes longer because the fact is a normal degree is 3 years. A degree apprenticeship might be 7 years. I can't remember the shortest apprenticeship because one of the reforms is they gave them a minimum time, and I think it's 18 months.
Mm.
So a level 2 one. So level 2 it's as hard as a GCSE. A level 2 hairdressing might be 18 months, 2 years, for example.
Mhm.
But your nuclear physics degree apprenticeship might be a 7 year thing, but
Mm.
that's including years working on the job. So you can come out of it with a degree, and it's not costing you thousands. And I think that's the big plus for apprenticeships. It's also, a nationally recognized standard. If you have an apprenticeship, everybody knows what it is right across the nation for whatever it is you studied, be it hairdressing, plumbing, agricultural work, whatever, right? They are the advantages. What's the downsides? My son, as I said earlier on, he's 18.
Mm.
He's looking to go to university at the moment. He doesn't want to do an apprenticeship. Why? because he's actually into the humanities. He wants to study Russian actually, and the apprenticeships are very, very skewed towards practical skills or scientific technical skills.
Hmm.
So if you want to do English lit, if you want to do history, a language, those kind of subjects, the apprenticeship route is probably not the route for you because there is limited to no choice in those areas. I mean, there are some, but whereas there's loads of choice with the technical and the scientific stuff. So again, it's like, if you are, I mean, there is stuff in the creative industries, but it's often to do with the production skills with TV or things like that. So, on a radio show, there would be stuff about like, producing the radio show and the technical stuff. Um, but like, if you're more of an artistic bent or you love the humanities, then, it might not be the route for you. And if you're an academic, and also I think there is a question of currency in the regards that apprenticeships are completely recognized all across the UK. But we live in a globalized world now. I talked, I mean, I come from a village, and my dad and mum literally worked all their lives within a few miles of where we lived. I've lived in 6 countries. We're living in a more globalized world these days, and are these is an apprenticeship as recognized abroad as a degree? Not yet. So I think if you want to go to, I don't know, Dubai, Kenya, China, wherever it is, then you might want the security of a degree. And also, I still think for some families, particularly, and this is more for the parents than the kids, it's sometimes the status of having a degree. Some people don't think apprenticeships have the same status. I think that's false, but I understand where those ideas come from.
And what about that degree apprenticeship? So that's new for me to hear of,
Well, that has the status, doesn't it?
Yeah,
It,
that
it,
has
it
it.
has the status and it has the international currency.
Yeah.
But of course, the degree ones are at a higher level. They're levels 6 and 7, and
Mm.
and you wouldn't likely to get a plumbing degree apprenticeship, for example. It would be more like with the higher technical skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's wonderful that that's there. That's amazing that that's there
Yeah.
to be able to access that. So I think it's great, parents, that you're listening to this evening and gaining that knowledge of the variety of venues or avenues for our children to progress into, that there's more ways than just one, and to open up and really look at what is it that your child wants to do, and what is their skills and their knowledge, and not everybody wants to do academia and go into that way. Some people do like working more practically and learning on the job and doing things. So to be able to acknowledge those apprenticeships and learn that way would be amazing. And then, as you say, there's one in the middle as well that will give them a bit of both. It will give that degree as well as that apprenticeship, which is really good. Where would parents now, if they're listening to this for the first time and kind of have their children coming up now doing, A levels and leaving school soon and not understanding what they're going to do next, where would parents go to find out more information? What website would you recommend?
Well, there was that gov.uk one that I
Mm.
mentioned earlier, and that's a really good place to start.
Yeah.
Again, it depends on what you're interested in. There's going just down to your college. I mean, your local college. We work with ones across the West Midlands, and they tend to offer similar things. So like plumbing, electrician, construction, hair and beauty, adult and social care, childcare, those kind you can get really quite easily. And what they do is they find the employer for you,
Mm.
which is good.
Very good.
If it's the higher stuff, the more technical stuff, I guess it's have a bit of a search. There is a wonderful event called the Skills Show that's on in the NEC every year,
Mm.
and it's free, and it's organized by World Skills, and they it is quite cool because they also get like young plumbers, young electricians, and young carpenters, and they compete against each other. And then the winner goes to a World Skills Championship, so you can actually see them at work in the show. But all the employers are there. And there's literally hundreds of them, and they're really pushing the apprenticeships. So, and all the universities and that. So, that's a great place to go. The only thing is, I've just done I just done a quick search on when's this year's. I think it was last week. So,
Oh.
I, but I would check for next year, and I would also, you know what, just get in touch with World Skills because that's what they're there for, and they're a government-funded body. Um, the other one that I always recommend to anyone is an organisation called the National Careers Service. So they are national, but they have different contracts in different regions. So the West Midlands one is run by a company called Prospects. I do a lot of work with them. It's government funded, and they give quality careers advice. They give CV advice. They give signposting, and they are a really good place to go up your interview skills. And it's all free. You know, you pay for it out of your taxes, so you might as well use it. And so that's a great place to go as well.
What's the
So
name of that again, Matt, if you don't mind repeating it, because I think a lot of our young people need that advice around interview skills in particular.
okay, it's National Careers Service.
National Career Service.
Just
Listeners,
Google them.
Google this information. There is lots of information. I'm learning so much this evening about what's happening, what's going on, what's in our community, how can we help and support our young people to find the right path to what they want, and things like interview skills is something that we need to be aware of and up ourselves in and understand, because things have changed from the time that we've done interviews as parents. Matt, we're in the last minute of the show
Uh,
indeed, which is, yeah, time has gone so quickly for us. Any top tip you'd like to give us before you end?
If you are an apprentice, join a union and then get in touch with us, get involved, particularly get in the Black Activist Program and know your rights. No matter whether you're an apprentice or not, whatever you're doing, know your rights and never, ever stop learning.
Oh, what great advice indeed on Parenting Hour. We should always be there, never stop learning. Learning from the cradle to the grave is part of your faith indeed. Thank you so much, Matt, for coming on this evening and sharing all that wonderful knowledge. And listeners, if you do want to find out more information, do ring in the studio on 0121 772 8892 and we'll pass on the questions to Matt, inshallah.